What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? I want to welcome y'all into another episode of the Philly Faithful Podcast, the one-stop shop for news, updates, and opinions on your Philadelphia Phillies. My name is Troy Brock. I am the host. You can find me on Twitter at Troy B Baseball. You can find the show on Twitter at Philly Faith Pods. Philly spelled with a PH, just like Philly. And today we're going to be talking about the catcher situation for the Philadelphia Phillies moving forward into 2025 and beyond. So if you're listening on Spotify or iTunes, give us a 5-star rating. It helps us out tremendously. And if you're watching on YouTube, leave a like, leave a comment, hit that subscribe button, turn on that notification icon so you can be notified when more episodes just like this one go live. And for the last few years, the catching situation has been pretty solid for the Philadelphia Phillies, as the Phillies have had JT Realmuto for the better part of a decade now, and he has been, for the majority of his career, the best catcher in baseball, and defensively, that is still the case. However, offensively, he has started to kind of struggle over the last couple of years, and it's really sad to see the drop off of where he was to where he is now. And yes, he did have knee surgery earlier in the year, but and he came back and he started catching. But I think that the biggest issue for JT Realmuto is that the Phillies have really overused him. I mean, if you look at it, he's been with the Phillies since 2019. He played 145 games in 2019, only missed 17 games as a catcher, which is insane. He played 47 games in 2020 out of 60. He played 134 out of 162 in 2021, 139 in 2022, 135 in 2023. And then, of course, this year he only played 99 because he had that knee surgery. But if you look at his plate appearances, I mean, since 2016, 545, 579, 531, 593, 2020, 195, 2021, 537, 562, 540, and then still over 400 this year. He had 413. And for catchers, that's a lot when you think about a catcher and how much playing they do. Generally, they don't play as much as JT Realmuto has in his career, and as much as he has still this year. It's the only time you see a catcher play as much as a guy like JT Realmuto does is in the postseason, because in the postseason you generally have your starting catcher play every game because your starting catcher is better than your backup catcher, and you know that's usually the case for most positions, but it's even more so for catcher, just because of with catchers you don't have as much. I mean, they're just generally not as good of hitters as other positions. Looking at the leaderboard for catchers in the regular season this year, the OPS leader was William Contreras with an 831 OPS. He played in 155 games and had 595 at bats, and he played in 120 games at catcher, 120 out of 155 at catcher. So the rest of his games he DH'd. 120 games catching. Salvador Perez, 158 games total, 590 at bats. But out of those 158 games, 91 were at catcher, 49 were at first base, and the rest were DHing. Tyler Stevenson, or let's go to the next. Adley Rutschman, 148 games. He's young. He's a new catcher to Major League Baseball. He's only 26 years old. 103 games catching out of his 148, so 45 games DHing. And then, of course, you have Cal Raleigh, 153 games. 135 were catching. So generally that 135 range is what you see. Yainer Diaz, 148 games. And out of those 148 games, 102 were catching and 11 were at first base. So, you know, you see a lot of catchers doing other things, playing first base and DHing to get them out from behind the plate, especially when their bat is worth keeping in the lineup. And for the majority of his career, JT Realmuto's bat has been worth keeping in the lineup, as you can see by his OPS plus. His OPS plus since 2016 has been over 100 in every year. He has a 112 OPS plus for his career, which means throughout his career he's been 12% better than league average. And in his 6 seasons with the Phillies, he has a 114 OPS plus, which means that in his time with the Phillies, he's been 14% better than league average. But in 2023 and 2024, 2023 he had a 105 OPS plus, and in 2024 he had a 109 OPS plus. So across those 2 years, he had a 107 OPS plus, which is only 7% better than league average. And in that time, he hit 258, 316, 442 for a 757 OPS, which is lower than his 782 career OPS and than his 793 OPS in his time with the Phillies. So before 2023 and 2024, from 2019 through 2022, his OPS was over 800 at 811, and he had a 117 OPS plus with the Phillies in that time. 800 total bases, 75 home runs, 272 RBI, 12 triples, 93 doubles, 12 triples in that time. And then he's only got, I say only, he's got 6 in 2023 and 2024, but 5 of them came in 2023. And of course, he did have that inside the park home run in 2023 against the Braves in the National League Division Series, which was a fantastic moment for him and for the Phillies. And it was just a great all-around moment. But you can see that he has declined year over year. 2022, 820 OPS, 2023, 762 OPS, 2024, 751 OPS. And 2022, yes, was the best season of his career per OPS plus with a 130. But the drop off is just so drastic that it's his age is becoming an issue. He is 33 years old, and he'll be 34 on March 18th. So he's going to be a 34-year-old catcher. And the Phillies really need to start thinking about, especially with this being the last year of his contract coming up, the Phillies need to start thinking about not starting him every day, especially at catcher. And you can't start him at first base because Bryce Harper, and you can't start him at DH because Kyle Schwarber. So you have to have a backup option to be a backup catcher for those days when JT Realmuto is not catching. And right now, that backup option is Garrett Stubbs. And while he's great to have in the clubhouse, and he seems like a really good person, and he's not a good offensive catcher in his career. He spent the first 3 seasons of his career with the Astros, and then he spent the last 3 seasons with the Phillies, where he's been the backup catcher for JT Realmuto. With the Phillies over those 3 years, he's played in 141 games, so a full season's worth of games, 433 plate appearances. He's hit 222, 305, 324 for a 628 OPS and a 77 OPS plus, which means he's been 23% worse than league average. And that's not good, especially considering with JT Realmuto getting up there in age, you want to start not starting him as much. You, instead of starting him 3 or 4 days in a row before giving him a day off, you need to start JT Realmuto like other teams do with their catchers, where game 1 of a series, game 2 of a series, game 3 are both night games. Game 3 is a day game. Give him the day game off in every series. Give him 1 game off in every series. And that will drastically cut down on your production from behind the plate, offensively and especially defensively, but it will help prolong JT Realmuto's career that much more, because as it stands right now, the way they're playing him, they're running him into the ground, and they could look at it like he's not our problem after 2025, because he most likely won't be re-signed after 2025. He'll be entering his age 35 season as a catcher, and he's already shown decline in his offense. So he's most likely not going to re-sign with the Phillies after 2025. But Garrett Stubbs is just not a viable backup for JT Realmuto. And then, of course, you have Rafael Marchand, the prospect. Well, he's not a prospect anymore, but the former prospect, who is 25 years old. He'll be 26 on February 25th. And he's better offensively, but then defensively, you take a hit behind the plate. So it's kind of a pick your poison. Do you want your catcher to be a good hitter, or do you want your catcher to be a good fielder? And what the Phillies have had really throughout the last 6 years with JT Realmuto is both. They've had both. And when you go to Rafael Marchand, you're only getting one of those things. When you go to Garrett Stubbs, you're really getting none of those things. So you have to look at it and you have to say, all right, which one of these things do I value more? The pop time is still there at a very, very small sample size for Marchand. He's got a 1.87 pop time, whereas JT Realmuto's is 1.85, and the pop time is there for Garrett Stubbs also. I think his is 1.89, which are all elite pop times. But the framing for Rafael Marchand is it's a zero, of a perfect 0. And then for JT Realmuto, the framing for him, if he'll pull up on Baseball Savant, but it's not looking like he will. So I'm going to type in his last name because I didn't put the periods between J and Z. The framing for JT Realmuto is a -3. So he's not really great at that, but his caught stealing above average is a 4. And his blocking's not great. His framing's not great, but he limits the damage on the base paths. He's also really fast. He's at the 79th percentile for speed at 28.4, but his pop time is in the 97th percentile at 1.85. And at one point in his career, he was the best at pop time. And then if you look at Garrett Stubbs on Baseball Savant, his stats are as follows, because Marchand is the hitter. Realmuto is the caught stealing specialist, whereas Garrett Stubbs is also the caught stealing specialist. Like I said, I thought it was 1.89. It's 1.88, which is 92nd percentile. So Rafael Marchand is 0.01 better, negligible, and in much smaller sample size. Framing for Stubbs is also negative, as well as blocks above average, but his caught stealing above average is 3. So you really have to look at what is your goal going forward for the catching position. Do you want a catcher who can hit but isn't that great fielding? And then you have Rafael Marchand. You don't have to spend any money. You have him. Use JT Realmuto on a day-to-day basis, starting 2 games and then off a game each series, and then Rafael Marchand in the game that JT's off. Have Garrett Stubbs just use him as a pinch hitter or an emergency catcher or something if he's still on the roster. But he's just he's great to have in the clubhouse. He seems like a great guy, but you want to win World Series, not have the best people, all of the best people in the league in your locker room. I mean, yes, kumbaya, that would be great, but that doesn't always win World Series, and the goal is to win a World Series. And so without making any moves, and with JT Realmuto still on the roster in 2025, in my opinion, the best bet would be to JT Realmuto games 1 and 2 of a series. Game 3, he's off. And if it's a 4-game series and the 4th game is the day game after a night game, then okay, he'll start 3 games in a row and then be off the 4th. But you cannot continue to run him into the ground starting 4 or 5 games in a row, sometimes 6, before he gets a game off. Save that for the postseason. Save his legs for the postseason, because we saw what Realmuto did in the postseason this year, and it was a lot of nothing. Now, if you want to go somewhere outside of the organization, then you start looking at the free agent catchers for this year, and you can look at guys like Kyle Higashioka. He's 35. You don't really need him to be your everyday guy. Travis d'Arnaud, 36. You, again, don't need him to be your everyday guy. And then you've got guys like Danny Jansen. He's only 30. He doesn't have to be your everyday guy. He's a good fielding catcher. He's got a 309 base percentage this year, 349 slug. But other than that, he's not the best hitter. Carson Kelly would kind of be a good of both. He's 32. A lot of old catchers in free agency. Honorable mentions on this list: Jacob Stallings, Tucker Barnhart, Austin Hedges. If you want a fielding catcher to be your backup catcher, then you need to get Austin Hedges, because he is one of, if not the best fielding catchers. He is one of, if not the best at calling games from behind the plate for the pitching staff. And with the pitching staff that the Phillies have, if you have a catcher behind the plate that is the one of, if not the best in the sport at calling games, just think about how much better the Phillies pitching staff would be on a day-to-day basis. Taijuan Walker might be usable in the 5th spot. And I'm not saying JT Realmuto is bad at calling a game, because he's not, or Garrett Stubbs is bad at calling a game, because he's not. But when you have the best, it's a lot different than having somebody that's good. So there's a lot to look at when you're looking at the catcher position for the Philadelphia Phillies. But the main takeaway is that JT Realmuto is getting old. And when people get old, their abilities and their talents start to decline, especially those at catcher. Their decline comes much more quick, and because they are just killing their knees. He's already had knee surgery. He had knee surgery in the middle of the season in 2024 and came back and just went right back to playing. Like, it was only a month after knee surgery, he was right back to catching. which was insane to me. But you got to start looking towards the future. And if that future is taking a hit at defense behind the plate, and in order to get good offensive production from behind the plate, you've got it in the organization already in Rafael Marchand. If you want to get some defense, Austin Hedges is old. You don't really want to go after him for long term, but for long term, if you want to look at finding another catcher that is good defensively, then Tyler Stevenson. You might look at a trade for Tyler Stevenson. He's 28. He's still got a lot of years under his legs. He caught 127 games for the Reds, and he also brought pretty good offense. He had the third highest OPS out of those catchers that qualified. He hit 258, 338, 444 with 19 home runs, 66 RBIs, 26 doubles, and a triple, 48 walks, and 117 strikeouts. Or you might want to look at trading for a guy like Cal Raleigh, 27 years old. It would take a lot to get him because the Mariners really like him a lot, but he is a offensive-minded catcher that can do all right behind the plate, and he's got a great nickname in Big Dumper. So, we're coming at a crossroads here for the Philadelphia Phillies and their catching situation for the future. 2025, JT Realmuto is still on the roster, and Garrett Stubbs is still there. Rafael Marchand is still there. The question that the Phillies are facing is, what do they do after 2025? And again, in my opinion, in 2025, JT Realmuto does not need to be starting 5 to 6 games in a row before getting a day off, because that is just tiring him and his old self out more than he needs to be as a catcher. And you cannot put him anywhere else because Bryce Harper is at first, unless you're doing it and giving Bryce Harper a day off. But why would you give Bryce Harper a day off? Because he's a first baseman now. You don't need to give him any days off. Or if you're giving Kyle Schwarber a day off, but he's a DH, you don't need to give him many days off. Unless one of those two guys are hurt, then you could work on putting JT Realmuto in the DH spot. But until that happens, and hopefully it does not, JT Realmuto is your catcher, and there's nowhere else to put him. So it's not the best situation for the Phillies going forward and the catching situation, but it definitely could be worse. It could be, it could be as bad as a team like the Atlanta Braves. Travis d'Arnaud is a free agent. He's 36 years old. They traded for their other catcher, whose name escapes me right now, but I will find it in just a moment. And he has not been as good as they wanted him to be. And he's only 29 years old, Sean Murphy. He has really struggled since coming to the Braves after being really good with the Athletics. And I say he's really struggled. He only struggled this year. But it was also mostly due to injury. In 2023, he was an all-star for the Braves. First time in his career he was an all-star, and he had a 127 OPS plus and an 844 OPS. So he may get back to that in 2025 if he can keep away from being injured. But as it stands, while the Phillies are not in the best situation, it definitely could be worse. But that is going to do it for us today. Hope y'all enjoyed it. We're going to be doing more of these positional breakdowns and how things look for the future for the Phillies as the offseason progresses. But thank you for joining us. I have been Troy Brock, your host. You can find me on Twitter at TroyBBaseball. You can find the show on Twitter at Philly Faith Pod. Faith spelled with a PH, just like Philly. If you're listening on Spotify or iTunes, give us a 5-star rating. It helps us out tremendously. If you're watching on YouTube, leave a like, leave a comment, hit that subscribe button, turn on that notification icon so you can be notified when more episodes just like this one go live. And tell your friends where they can find news, updates, and opinions on your Philadelphia Phillies. Let them know to check out the Philly Faith Podcast. And until that next episode does go live, I've been Troy. Y'all been awesome. Peace, love, and rock and roll. I'm out. Bye.